Today, we are diving into one of the all-time great stories of integrity and survival from the Book of Daniel. It's really a masterclass in how to not just get by, but actually thrive when your entire world gets turned upside down. And it all kicks off with a massive crisis.
So just imagine for a second, everything you know, your home, your country, your culture, your whole way of life is just gone. Conquered. You're dragged off to a foreign land as a captive. This is exactly what happens in our story, and it forces this huge question. When everything is stripped away, what's left? What do you hold on to?
So yeah, our story begins with this profound crisis. And it's not just a national crisis. It's a deeply personal one for the young men we're about to meet. It's a crisis of identity.
The year is 605 BC. The global superpower of the day, Babylon, has just laid siege to Jerusalem. But they don't just conquer the city. No, they have this brilliant and pretty cruel strategy. They deport the best and the brightest, the elite youth, the future leaders and thinkers. The plan? To completely remake them in Babylon's image.
Now, here's what's so cool about how this story is told. Scholar Dr. Wendy Widder makes this great point that the author isn't just giving us a history lesson. It's what she calls theological history. That means every single detail, every event, is carefully chosen and shaped to reveal who is really in control of the story.
For the people actually living through this, the question would have been absolutely terrifying. You have to understand, in the ancient world, a battle between nations was seen as a battle between their gods. So when Nebuchadnezzar wins, it looks for all the world like the god of Babylon just crushed the god of Israel. And that right there, that's the central tension of the entire book. But before we see how Daniel and his friends respond, we really need to grasp the sheer scale of the Babylonian power play they were caught up in. This was a full-court press.
So Judah didn't just fall overnight. It was a complete mess, a period of total political chaos. After their great king Josiah died, you had this disastrous succession of his sons and grandson, one after another, each weaker than the last. They were totally caught between the two warring superpowers, Egypt and Babylon. And all that turmoil? It created the perfect opening for Babylon to swoop in.
Now, the very first verse of the book gives us a little puzzle. It dates the siege to the 3rd year of King Jehoiakim's reign. But other historical texts, like the book of Jeremiah, seem to put it in his 4th year. And you might think, uh-oh, a mistake. But it's not. It's a clue.
So here's the key. Ancient cultures had different ways of counting a king's reign. The Judean system said the year you take the throne, that's year 1. But the Babylonians did it differently. They called that first year the Ascension year, and year 1 didn't start until the next new year. The author of Daniel intentionally uses the Babylonian system, which is a really subtle way of framing the entire story from the conqueror's perspective right from the start.
Okay, so once they get to Babylon, these young men are put into this systematic program basically designed to erase their identity. It's a 4-step process of total indoctrination. First, a new education to learn a whole new worldview. Second, a new language. Third, they're given new names that honor Babylonian gods. And finally, a new diet, food and wine straight from the king's own table.
And it's on that final point, the food of all things, where we see this quiet but incredibly powerful acts of defiance. I mean, think about it. They didn't protest the new school or the new names. But right here, Daniel draws a line in the sand. He makes this personal resolution, a deep commitment in his own heart, that he will not be defiled by the king's food and wine. But why? What exactly made the food defiling? The Bible doesn't spell it out for us. Was it because the food had been offered to idols first? Or maybe because it wasn't prepared according to Jewish kosher laws? Honestly, scholars have been debating this for centuries.
But here's a really compelling insight from scholars like Tremper Longman. They argue that the issue wasn't really about the menu. It was about dependence. See, to eat the king's food was to accept the king as your provider, your sustainer, the source of your life. And by refusing it, Daniel was making a radical statement about who his true source was.
And notice how he does it. He isn't loud or obnoxious about it. He's incredibly wise and tactful. He respectfully goes to his overseer and negotiates, proposing this simple 10-day test. It's a great lesson that you can hold firm to your convictions without being needlessly confrontational. So the test is a huge success. But the point of the story isn't about the power of a vegetarian diet. No, the author wants to show us who was really behind this victory. And the answer is kind of hidden in plain sight, in a phrase that gets repeated throughout the chapter.
The narrator has woven this pattern into the story, this repeating phrase that basically unlocks the theological heart of the whole chapter. It tells us who the real main character is, the one pulling the strings behind the scenes.
First, we see it right at the beginning. Nebuchadnezzar didn't win because he was stronger or his God was stronger. The narrator tells us very clearly that the Lord gave the king of Judah into his hand. This shows God is sovereign over everything, even global politics and the fall of nations.
Then we see it again when Daniel makes his risky request. The text says God gave him favor with the official. This is so important. It shows God's control isn't just on the grand stage of history, it's right down in the nitty-gritty of our personal relationships and daily interactions. And finally, after the test is over, we're told that God gave the 4 young men their incredible knowledge and skill. Their success, their ability to stand out, wasn't just their own achievement, it was a gift. God is the source of their ability to excel, even in this totally hostile environment.
So, what does this all add up to? Well, it's a powerful blueprint for not just surviving, but actually thriving in a culture that doesn't share your values.
The takeaways are pretty clear, right? First, God's sovereignty. He is in control even when things look totally grim. Second, faithful living. This story shows it is possible to hold on to your integrity in a hostile culture. Third, divine providence. God is active in the big headlines of history and in the small details of our lives. And finally, it reveals the true conflict. The real struggle isn't between earthly kings, but between the one true God and all the false gods vying for our allegiance.
For the original audience, for those Jewish exiles actually living in Babylon, this story would have been a lifeline. It was this defiant declaration that their God had not been defeated. No, he was right there with them, working for them, and was completely in control, even in the very heart of the enemy's empire.
And that leaves all of us with a question, doesn't it? We all face pressures to conform, to draw our identity and our sense of worth from the king's table, whether that's a job, a particular culture, or an ideology. Daniel's story forces us to ask ourselves, in a world full of competing loyalties, who or what is my ultimate source?